Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's wolfnyc, wolfnyc.com. Carrie-Ann Biondi, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Very nice to have you. I appreciate you accepting my invitation. I know it seemed kind of out of the blue, someone on the What is Money Show wanting to talk to a philosopher like yourself. But your paper, which we're going to get into here, titled Socratic Teaching Beyond the Paper Chase, caught my eye. And I think there's some good things in here. Talking a lot about how to teach, and drawing on lessons, well, really ancient wisdom more than anything, right? The way that Socrates taught, and how you've incorporated that into your teaching style. Just by way of quick introduction, you are an independent educator and an editor. I think you said you edit books and journals and whatnot. So to jump into this, I guess, as I mentioned to you offline, I'm somewhat new to this very I guess you'd call this foundational Western philosophy, right? When we're talking about Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, etc.
Yes.
And it seems like in that domain, the highest aim or the perennial question is this idea of virtue, right? Philosophers are seeking, I guess, one, to define virtue. What is it? How do we cultivate it in ourselves? And then how do we lead lives that inspire the cultivation of virtue in others? Whether that's through, explication or demonstration, which is something this paper is largely about. So to start our journey, could we just start with kind of that broad 3-part question? What is virtue? How do we cultivate virtue? And how do we inspire the cultivation of virtue in others?
Well, I hope to provide clearer answers, or at least my own account of how I approach answering those questions. Better than Socrates does. Socrates actually wasn't fully satisfied that you could come up with a proper and full response, although he spent his lifetime seeking answers to those questions. How I think about virtue as somebody in the virtue ethics tradition, as a neo-Aristotelian philosopher, is that virtue is the way that you are in the world, the kinds of actions that you pursue in order to achieve your values.
Mm.
So you have to keep in mind, what is your highest value and how do you have to be as a human being? What qualities or manner of way of being do you need to cultivate and enact every single day in your choices in order to achieve those values in your life?
Mm.
So that's how I would define virtue very broadly without specifying particular virtues.
Mm-hmm.
How you cultivate it is, first you have to understand, well, what are values? What role do they play in your life? And think about the kinds of actions, types of actions you would need to cultivate in order to achieve those values.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, you uh, you valued friendship. You would need to be reliable, honest, uh, and that whole collection of ways of being with the other human beings
Mm.
that would earn their friendship, and you would be the kind of person who other people will be able to trust and place value in and have a certain kind of good character that they could count on over time, kind of shared endeavor together.
Mm.
And so you really need to think through that to figure out what the specific virtues would be. And then uh, pay attention to what kinds of specific actions and in the context of your life and are going to help you achieve those values. How do you inspire other people to act virtuously? You need to, I think, be very curious about, well, what do they value? And have them like keep their eye on the prize, so to speak.
Mm.
If they say, okay, well, yeah, I do, that is value of a value to me. And then you wonder out loud with them. This is where the kind of the Socratic questioning comes in. Well, what ways do you think you need to be in order to achieve that
Mm-hmm.
that value? Uh, and a key to all of this is being very reality oriented. Like what's
Mm.
really going to be effective in achieving this? Don't delude yourself. You're not fooling anybody. You just have to be very honest about the undertaking and to be very clear on that. So that's one thing to help cultivate in yourself and others. But to inspire in other people, helping other people know their own minds and to draw out of them what their values are, I think is a good first step. Because people may think it sounds good. Oh, I want to be virtuous, but what does it even mean?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's actions oriented toward achieving value, well, what are your values? And help, if they're not entirely clear, help them get clear on that. I think the other side of that is just being a person of integrity yourself.
Mm.
That's deeply inspirational. And I might turn it around and ask you, uh, who inspires you to become the best version of yourself?
Ooh, that's an excellent question. I was sharing with you offline that, well, recently gotten deeper into Western philosophy. I read more Eastern philosophy earlier in my life, and also reading Rene Girard's work on mimetic desire, where people are constantly role modeling for one another. I've developed a very significant appreciation for mythological figures, let's say. And so part of the reason we're talking today is one of those figures that was really inspiring to me is Socrates. His ability to just deftly handle people that are, attacking him verbally or trying to belittle him or make fun of him or outsmart him in a very humble, sort of humorous way. Um, and then, the way he ultimately embodied his philosophy, right? Like he voluntarily died to, I guess, represent justice in a way. That might be a bigger can of worms to get into, but again, the book I'm drawing on there is Plato's Critique of Impure Reason, which concludes that Socrates was basically that you can't just propositionally describe the philosophy; you have to embody it. And Socrates is like an archetype of that to some extent. So
Mhm.
Socrates would be one. And then, Christ is another, that he's sort of this meta hero in the Christian tradition, where he meets some of the worst things that can happen to a human being with the, most virtuous response, you might say, meeting betrayal with love and hatred with compassion and etc. So I don't know if you were asking me about specific living people, but those are the first two that came to mind.
It, the people who inspire you are the people who inspire you. So these are two historical examples of individuals whose lives and all, it sounds like that's have inspired you by their living embodied example. Like what were they willing to do for their values?
Yes. Yeah.
And
And
that was sounds like it was very powerful for you.
yeah, thank you. Well, I guess I really developed, earlier in life. I thought, oh, these are adult fairy tales, not Socrates so much, but things like Christ and Christianity. I was like, oh, these are just adult fairy tales. People feel good about them, but it doesn't really mean a lot. But over the years, I've developed a very deep appreciation for having an ideal towards which to pattern your life after. And so, yeah, I've tried to purposefully insert Socrates and Christ there. Not that I'm not claiming that I'm doing an amazing job or anything. It's just a direction I'm trying to move. If I had to choose, this might sound a little bit of a stark change, but if I had to choose someone that was recently living as a more real example, I really admire someone like Steve Jobs that just made such a significant contribution to the human race. Um, not equating him to Christ or Socrates, but just someone that lived and uh, really put a high value on making a contribution, basically, to our knowledge and wealth and our technological prowess. I think that's really something I would like to pattern my life on as well. Um, just to throw in a more recent example.
No,
Uh,
that's a wonderful variety of examples. And in each of those cases, these are individuals who had certain values. They pursued them passionately,
yeah,
those values, in the very deep sense of the word. They devoted their lives to achieving, bringing their values into existence, not just talking about them, but living them.
yes,
And uh, and being really moved by that. And
yeah,
in so doing, they have inspired and motivated other people to say, "Wow, these are individuals who gave it their all."
yes,
And fill in the blank, whatever their values are. To me, it sounds a lot like the virtue of integrity is deeply moving for you. To live
yeah,
with integrity, to put your life where your values are, quite literally.
yes, yeah. It's kind of I mean, it feels like we do. You have one shot at life, right? You want to kind of live it to its fullest.
Mhm.
Um, and the other word that came up for me as you were saying that, I don't know if this is considered to be a virtue, but the commonality between the three of those is, I would say, they're at least humanitarian, right? They really cared about others and bringing out the best in others. Obviously, very different ways, right? Like Steve Jobs was
Mhm.
notoriously an asshole to work with, but he also built, the most valuable company in the history of the world, as far as I know.
Mhm.
Socrates and
I
Christ
just
took,
hold up your I'm
yes,
holding my Apple iPhone right now because the revolution he created in putting so much sovereignty in the hands of individuals
yeah,
to direct your life and how empowering his creation has been.
that's an excellent point. Um, I have a question for you, actually. So, virtue, I think you said something like it's the way we must be to manifest the values that we want in the world, right? Like a mode of being that brings our values into existence,
Yes. So
something
it's
like
it's
that.
a con const it's a consistently pursued way of being
Yeah.
that helps you achieve your values.
So, my question is the quality of virtue then, in whole or in part, a function of the value at which it is aimed? And the example that came to mind was like, well, there could be a guy that's like, he just really values being drunk. That's just his number one goal. And we could say he was virtuous in his pursuit, perhaps, if he did, really prioritize his life for getting drunk. And there's probably millions of people that have done this, but I don't know that we'd exactly describe them as virtuous individuals. So what is the relationship then between the value at which virtue is aimed and the quality of virtue?
That is an excellent question. And this is perhaps one of the most important human questions to ask and answer. What really is of value? And I think that something could not truly be a virtue unless it was anchored in a reality-oriented value. Something, and by that I mean something that's really going to serve you constructively as a human being. So I think values need to be life-enhancing, not life-destroying. So if you pursue endeavors that are going to destroy you, that's and people do that, but they're a negation of value pursuit ultimately. So that, to me, that would be kind of a almost maybe not an immediate performative contradiction. It's not as immediate as, say, taking your own life.
Sure.
But I think that values are that which is going to help promote your flourishing. And this is where my Aristotelianism comes in.
No, that makes sense. So yeah, the virtue is aimed at some outcome, but if it's not a life-affirming outcome, then it's not really a value. It'd almost be like an anti-value in a way.
It would be, disvalue or, and that to me would be, and so if someone's going to be efficient in getting drunk quicker, then even it could be, and somebody could, partake of drinking alcohol in a very moderate way that does not undercut their ability to achieve values in the world. But to make that your goal as a hedonistic goal would be because to obliterate your consciousnness, or to have blackouts, to get cirrhosis of the liver, et cetera, alcohol poisoning and be in the hospital, like this is a road to self-destruction to varying degrees, which would undermine value pursuit. So to me, value pursuit would have to be synonymous with trying to achieve over the long run of your life a flourishing way of being as an individual, which would also require you to interact well with others who can help you bring out the best in yourself. I mentioned the virtue of virtues if you valued friendship, for example. So surrounding yourself with good people who challenge you and support you at the same time to help bring out the best in yourself, that would be very value enhancing. And over your lifespan. And so there are different ways of being in the world for yourself and in relation with others that would help you and those around you develop increasingly flourishing lives of ways of being excellent together. Thank you for your question. I mean, it really, if pursuing any old thing that you want is not the same thing as value pursuit. And that's a very important, that's what distinguishes, I think, the pursuit of flourishing from a hedonism.
Yes. Okay. Right. I want to maybe add another wrinkle to it, if I may. So virtue is the pattern of action that brings value into existence, or at least increases our chances for bringing it. I guess we can't really control the outcome, but we can sort of aim towards it, work towards it.
Yeah.
But that aim needs to be life affirming for it to be a value and not be an anti-value, right? But I would imagine that this is not, well, of course there are gradations, right? It's not black or white, because the other example that came to mind is, well, working out is life affirming, but taken too far, it becomes exercise addiction, or, people that just work themselves out until there's other cost in their lives, right? Maybe they're getting injured or not going to work or something, right? There's some negative consequence to too much, right? So I would take it there. This is a very subjective thing, right? Like, where do you draw the line between, say, someone
Mhm.
that's if we just stick with that example, you feel free to insert a different example if you'd like. It's just the one that came to mind. Someone that might be like a fitness buff versus an exercise addict, right? Like, where's the line
Mhm.
between those two?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question too. You're just full of wonderful questions. Uh, well, okay, so let me backtrack before I directly respond to your
Mm-hmm.
question. To if you value that which is life enhancing, but life isn't something out there apart from you
Mm-hmm.
that you're going to achieve someday. Life is constituted by your whole constellation of choices every day of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So the values that constitute your life are manifold, right? So there's your work, there's your well-used leisure time, there are
Mm-hmm.
friends, there are hobbies, right? There's a whole constellation of pursuits involved there, and they all constitute your life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not separate from what you're doing now. Some people are like, I'm just waiting to live until, or my real life starts. Like,
Mm-hmm.
no, you've been living all along and creating the texture and experience of your life all along with these choices. And if you're not satisfied with it as it is now, and your experience of it as it is now, then like figure out what are the choices and ways of being you need to do differently going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where, well, what do you genuinely value? What are you not yet doing that you say you value? And kind of recalibrate your pursuits. And so you can start experiencing greater joy today. You don't have to keep waiting. So uh, to get to take that understanding of your life is constituted by a constellation of your value pursuits. That is your life.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and to go back and answer your question about the difference between a fitness buff or maybe a professional fitness coach,
Mm-hmm.
nutritionist, etc., versus a exercise addict.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so somebody may have gotten all caught up in a negative self-image, for example, and they're overcompensating by working out at the gym not 2 or 3 hours a day, but 8 hours a day, and they've stopped going to work, and they uh,
Mm-hmm.
dropped a significant other, and they don't see their friends anymore, and they're taking steroids, and suddenly, like, their whole
Mm-hmm.
life is hijacked by either building up muscle or losing weight or, some combination thereof, and they're suddenly undermining their ability to perceive a whole variety of values and live this one-dimensional excess of that's that's very monolithic. It's the only
Mm-hmm.
thing they're doing, and they're obsessed with it for unhealthy, psychologically and emotionally unhealthy ways. And it's
Mm-hmm.
going to really end up having them lose other values or things that they used to value. And that will be self-destructive and alienating. You'll find yourself lonely, and you're not going to be any closer to a strong self-image by pursuing it that way. So I think that's you could see, like, when you spin out what
Mm-hmm.
really, if you keep pursuing, what are the causal consequences of making these choices, looking at cause and effect, like being reality oriented. If I keep doing this, what's the outcome going to be? Where has it led me so far? Whereas somebody who's in the gym maybe 8 or 10 hours a day, that could be their vocation, and they could engage in it in a healthy way. It's not that they're there because they're working out for 8 hours trying to lose weight or, turn into their physique into Mr. Universe,
Mm-hmm.
but they're there to help coach other people and to maybe run experiments on, cardiovascular
Mm-hmm.
fitness and which type of routine is going to be best. And it could be part of their vocation that they use constructively. So
Mm.
I couldn't say a priori, anyway, before
Sure.
experience, like how to understand somebody's context of, why are they doing things this way? What are the effects of them doing things this way? And actually looking at how does it show up in the quality and experience of their living? Is it
Mm.
making them more miserable? Is it making them happier? and looking at how their choices are affecting the overall texture of their lives.
That's that's an excellent answer. And so and they seem to go hand in hand, right? The motivations would have to be non-virtuous in a way to create that level of imbalance, right? You'd have to have some kind of whatever body dysmorphia perhaps to really go to the gym 8 hours a day. So the motivation couldn't be virtuous in a way, right? Like it wouldn't be it's almost like the motivation and the action are very closely related in that respect. Um,
Absolutely. So
yeah.
when you were mentioning dysphoria, there's a book, The Adonis Complex, I had
Hmm.
read some years ago when it came out, and that's one version of it for men, because there have been a lot of books
Mm.
focused on, women who are anorexic or bulimic, but men also have these kind of body image issues as well. And
Hmm.
I thought it was a very fascinating psychological exploration of it, in a way that people at the time had not really thought about or thought of as a live possibility, but that many people unfortunately had gotten caught up in it. So this is why absolutely you're putting your finger on, I think, the heart of what I wanted to get at, which is
Mm.
the motivation behind the action, like what's moving this person. So there are psychological components to
Hmm.
human action that help us understand their context of choice. Like, why are they really doing this? Or why are you really doing something?
Hmm. Hmm.
Reflecting in your own actions,
Yeah.
what's really moving you, and being very clear and honest with yourself about why you're making a certain type of choice. And do you want to be moved by that, or do you want to step back and reflect and think
Hmm.
harder about it so you can give yourself the opportunity to choose differently and better?
Mm. That's excellent. Yeah, just reflecting on my own life, like I was actually a little bit overweight as a kid. And so when I got into my teenage years, I started exercising specifically to try and, well, actually, it was for sport initially, and then it was for looking better, right? Being leaner, stronger, etc. And that has become like hardened into a habit, basically. And it's changed. Like what I get out of it has changed over the years. Again, started out sport, then more aesthetic. Now that I'm a little bit older, it's more like sanity meditation. I do a lot of work with my brain, but to go to the gym and just play loud music and not have any cognitive inputs for an hour and just act like a wild animal at the gym, like is really a nice balance. Um, but definitely, um, there have been times where like the aesthetic motivation can cause you to be excessive in the working out department. And so it's interesting how the texture quality of the motivation, as it changes, your actual action pattern changes. I feel like I'm in a good healthy place with it now, but there's times like in my early 20s and stuff, I just wanted to get as big and strong as possible. And yeah, it's interesting to think about that way.
And
um
if you listen to uh, I don't know if this is how you experience the transformation over time,
mhm,
but sometimes other people can tell you from the outside, "Oh, this is how you should be," or "Don't do it this way."
mhm.
But the only way to get to it is to go through it.
Mm,
It's
yeah.
by living by the lived experience, like, if that satisfying to you, maybe it was up to a certain point, but not fully, and you realize there was something more, and maybe the role it was playing in your life you
Yeah.
wanted to shift.
Yeah.
And, like, now I'm at a certain age, I'm in my 50s, and, so fitness for me is more about longevity,
Yeah.
right? Lifespan and health span, right? Peter Attia talks about,
Yeah.
outlive, um is the idea of, what role does exercise healthily play for you if you want to live a long, vital life up to the end? And for me, fitness, having it play that role in keeping me vital to pursue the things I love for as long
Mm.
as I can with good cognitive health and physical health, that's very important to me. And that's about as life affirming of a general approach, and having fitness be part of that is crucial. Like being too sedentary, as somebody who I was a philosophy professor for 25 years,
Mm-hmm.
from being an adjunct graduate student up through a professor, and uh, combating that sedentariness with physical activity. I did it at first as, oh, okay, I have to do this to uh, combat all the ailments that might come with that. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to have, bad posture,
Mm-hmm.
headaches, etc. And over time came to really embrace, you mentioned meditation
Mm-hmm.
effects, etc. And that there are a lot of cognitive benefits to it too.
Yes.
And I've come to appreciate the role of fitness in my life, from the sport when I was young to grudgingly got to do this, to not sit at the desk for 10 hours a day, to actually enjoying it.
Yes. Yeah, there are tremendous cognitive benefits. And that's part of the value of the thing, right? It's not just physical, it's also mental.
I-
Um,
yes.
if I may, so sorry, I keep thinking of new wrinkles to this. This is just the opening question or set of questions, but there's a lot here. We talk a lot on this show about private property, what we call the corruption of money, which is really just central banking. So the centralization and monopolization of money, money printing.
Mm.
It's my strong view, which I share with basically the libertarian philosophy, that money printing is theft. And so we talk a lot about the socioeconomic impacts of that, but also the psychological motivations and psychological impact of these types of institutions. What I wanted to ask about was theft. Like, we do talk about this a lot. So an individual that is stealing could actually be doing so in a life affirming way at a very individual scope and scale, right? If someone is starving to death and they're stealing the piece of bread to survive. I'm not advocating for this. I'm just trying to sort of devil's advocate throw this out. But I guess the Ayn Rand perspective on this, which I really like, is like, if you allow that to be the standard, that okay, people can steal when they need something, then what is her line on this? She says the murderer wins out over the pickpocket, and that society vanishes in a spread of ruins and slaughter. So it's like, you need this virtuous standard of human interaction. If you make it non-virtuous, or I guess
Mm.
this would be vicious in a way. I don't know if that's the right term. Uh,
Yes. Yeah,
theft
that's
is,
the opposite of virtue is vice. So it would be
yeah.
vicious.
So let's say at least a non-productive, non-consensual human interaction like theft, if you
Mm.
let that be the standard, then it basically unravels, the social fabric, something like that. So I guess the question is, what scale and scope, when we say value must be life affirming, is this the value of the individual in that individual act? Is this considering that if that individual's acts were imitated by others, what the consequences of that might be? Like, how do we hone in on the scale of the life affirming aspect of value?
Okay, so I guess there's because I, as being politically libertarian and
Mm-hmm.
very much as influenced by Ayn Rand as I have been by Aristotle and Socrates,
Mm-hmm.
uh, in this regard, but and actually endorse what Rand would call the trader principle,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and the principle of voluntary exchange on the
Yes.
libertarian view, that there are two levels, right? There's the individual level, which I think you need virtue. If you were living by yourself on a desert island, you would need to exercise the virtues of being rational and productive, because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise you die.
Yes.
So as an individual, what's going to promote your ability to survive uh, to a typical human healthy lifespan, and using your mind to figure out and solve the issues of human living.
Mm.
And so you need to be rational and productive and create those values, but also source things that are sources of meaning to you. So you have to think in order to produce, in order to live.
Mm.
And when you interact with other human beings, no matter the scale, those principles are still going to hold. But then on top of these certain types of virtues to, help you pursue and achieve as best you can the life affirming values, you would need to look at what sorts of rules and laws over the long run are going to help promote that.
Mm.
So it's not living is not a moment to moment thing. Like we're not a bunch of time slices.
Yeah.
Our living is a dynamic process over time. So what ways of being over time are going to help promote and foster the conditions of bringing out the best in you and those around you?
Mm.
And protection of property, protection of the fruits of your productivity.
Mm-hmm.
Those fruits are going to be ideas, products, services,
Mm-hmm.
anything from an innovative teaching method to an iPhone to a much more nutritionally packed burger. So whatever the product, service, or idea is that you bring out into the world to say, hey, look what I came up with, and trade with others, right? This is a huge topic that you're asking a whole constellation of questions about, but it all starts with, what would it take for me to flourish, to live in a life promoting way in the world? And then when you add that to interactions with other human beings, what does it take for us to live together in a life enhancing way in the world? And coming up with the principles and laws by which to conduct and navigate our interactions with one another. So, and theft would violate that, because that's taking from somebody else what they have produced without their consent.
Right.
Why didn't the person just ask me?
Right.
And Rand has Ayn Rand has an essay called "The Ethics of Emergencies," where you can't start with the lifeboat situation. That's not the norm in life. And so if you can't do ethics starting with lifeboat scenarios, the way to think about ethics, well, what is our nature as a human being? What do we need to survive? And by that, to survive as humans, being who we are and respecting how we are by nature. And what would it require of me to be as a human to respect your rational faculty and your ability to choose? It would be to ask you, say, hey, I'm in a tough way right now. Here's my story. And would you mind sharing some of your lunch with me? Or can I borrow $10 till I get back on my feet? And here's how I'll make good on it and pay you back with interest, right? There are terms we could navigate through conversation and consent.
If you are a business owner or manager, you should know these three numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000 is the number of businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, which allows you to streamline accounting, financial management, human resources, and more. NetSuite turns 25 years old this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days rather than weeks, and to drive down cost. And finally, 1, because your business is one of a kind. So with NetSuite, you get a customized solution for all your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth. NetSuite is everything you need all in one place. Right now, you can download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/whatismoney. That's netsuite.com/whatismoney to get your free KPI checklist. Again, netsuite.com/whatismoney.
Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE.
Excellently put. And I would, the golden rule comes up there a little bit, right? Like, don't steal from others because you wouldn't want to be stolen from, sort of thing, you know?
Yeah, I usually hesitate to use it in the form of the golden rule. I know that's a one that has a lot of cultural traction because most people don't want to be treated disrespectfully or to have their consent, ride roughshod over.
Yeah.
So for most people, that would work. For some people who might not be as psychologically healthy, they might actually for whatever reason, enjoy being mistreated, or they don't just think they deserve a good life, and so they'll treat other people miserably. So trying to capture it in the golden rule, you have to be very careful what you wish for, because other people might not wish for things as benevolently as you do.
Right. Or they would at least have the plausible deniability to just say, oh, I like getting stolen from, that's why I stole from you, or I like getting beat up, that's why I beat you up, something like that.
Yeah, or I've heard people actually say, "Oh, spanking never hurt me as a child." It's like, whoa. So that's why I have heard people say things like that, and they justify, well, it didn't do me permanent damage, so you can't tell me I can't do this activity because look at me. And so they do use these patterns as justifying tools for engaging in bad conduct toward others.
I see. So, well, that's a tricky one, right? Because you almost want to keep the locus of sovereignty at the individual level, but in a way, although the golden rule does that, it sort of opens up this Pandora's box, perhaps, for
it can, if people use it in
they instrumentalize it or something like that.
Yeah, in the spirit in which it was not intended.
Yeah. And that totally makes sense. I would also say, I think Atlas Shrugged is sort of an extended answer to that question. Like, what if you let society run this way, what happens?
Yes, playing out that kind of thought experiment. And it's not fully science fiction if you actually study comparative political and legal systems that have adopted different variants of certain laws and institutions. What do people's lives end up looking like?
Yeah.
Ideas matter. Ideas have consequences, and we have lots of real life case studies historically of societies that go better versus worse depending on the ideas that they live under.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And the crux of that, in my view, is you touched on it earlier, but just private property, right? If it's honored and respected, and in the broader scope of understanding property, right? Like life, liberty, property. That seems to work. Whereas once you start aggressing against that, it seems to unravel things. Okay, one last question about this. We've established virtue and value, and the life-affirming nature of value, and the fact that it must be able to scale, right? As you said, it's not just one act in time. You're not just a slice of life in time once. You're this community of slices of across time, right? So you need to consider the broader implications of your actions. Socrates said, I think he said this, the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. But as you mentioned earlier, he struggled with some of his definitions. So what I've read somewhere, and I don't remember where that was now, that wisdom represented a constellation of virtues. So someone that perhaps is wise has cultivated many virtues through a life.
of hard-won experience, presumably. How would you define wisdom, and then what is its relationship to virtue?
Oh, wow. Wisdom is broader than knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
People can have knowledge, people can achieve knowledge in different domains. Like you might be more knowledgeable about Bitcoin systems.
Mm-hmm.
I might be more knowledgeable about pedagogies that work better versus worse in a classroom. I might be knowledgeable about how to build furniture or bake a cake. Fill in the blank. There are various domains in which you can achieve knowledge or knowledge of American history versus history of Taiwan. So there are various domains you could achieve knowledge in about the world.
Mm-hmm.
Wisdom would be, I think, a way to meta level understanding where you can pull together your various domains of knowledge and figure out how you're going to use your knowledge well in your life.
Mm.
So it's applying knowledge to the context of your life in a principled way that reflects genuine, experience in life
Mm-hmm.
to help you achieve those values. So wisdom, right? There's the AA prayer, right? The knowing the difference between what you do and don't have control over, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yes. Yes.
Right? So that you can then be very deliberate and careful and principled about the way you draw on your knowledge
Right.
to make choices in your life to enhance it.
Well said. The AA prayer, I think, is what you called it there.
Oh, yeah, the AA prayer
Yeah.
that would start every meeting when people were recovering from alcoholism
Yeah.
or whatever substance, and trying to be very clear about what are because human beings are not all powerful,
Yeah.
right? But we're more powerful in many ways than we realize.
Yes.
And so I think, and with the wisdom to understand and to accept the boundaries of that, and also to push the limits, like what people often don't realize how much wonderful capacity they have to be creative in their lives.
Mm.
By creative, I mean producing things of material and spiritual value to flourish, and that they can actualize a lot more of the unrealized potential than they know. But they also are not all powerful. I can't will myself to jump 100 feet in the air like Superman. Right?
Sure.
That's beyond the bounds of what humans can do. And I also think that one of those important boundaries that gets back to property rights that you mentioned a little while ago is that I can't control what other people think or ultimately what other people are going to choose to value. I can
Right.
try to persuade them. I can ask them, we can have conversations, but at a certain point, they are them and I am me.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people get frustrated that other people are not just like them or don't do the things that they want them to do. And then they start subtly using manipulation or force or fraud to get what they want, forgetting that that's not a virtuous way of interacting with others. And it's to wish that human beings were other than they were. So I think that this deeper conversation about virtue and the nature of virtue and how to treat yourself and others, this very, very much permeates legal and political systems
Yes.
and what people develop, and it's rooted in, well, what's real?
Yes. No, that's fantastic. And what other thing that came up for me, it sounds like it mirrors Stoicism. The Stoicism sort of focusing on what you can control, accepting that what you cannot control. And if you really boil that down, you can really only control your effort and your attitude. I don't know that there's much else that you really can control. I mean, even those things are hard enough to control as it is, outcomes that you aim at, they're always beyond your control, right? Obviously, you can persuade them and influence them and increase the probability of them occurring, but there's never a case that I can think of where an outcome is like strictly under your control.
But that's a good point. I wouldn't, because I myself am not a Stoic,
Mhm.
but this overlaps a lot with the Stoic philosophy. And with respect to this is why I'm more Aristotelian and not as Stoic, is that I think that you can have more direct control over your domain of material existence in ways that I think a Stoic might draw more limits to, and it also the not being afraid to have joyful, loving connections with other people out of fear of people are mortal, right? So there's the acceptance of that boundary of mortality that is not going to lead me to what some Stoics argue for as a Stoic detachment from the world. I'm very passionately attached to my living well in the world and the people who I love and achieving those values in embodied existence. And yes, they could be destroyed, and people die, but that's not going to keep me from loving them as fiercely as I do. Because to be afraid of grief would undermine my experience of joy. And so that doesn't sound very Stoic, but that is something. And so there is, to not be able to fully control doesn't mean to be unable to influence.
Yes.
And this is where I think that the much earlier question you brought up about inspiring virtue in others, right? Sometimes you don't realize how much influence you could have. And I'm not saying a nefarious or manipulated influence, but the power of people doing wonderful things in the world is incredibly powerful and empowering. Like the word, sometimes people throw the word power around as though it were inherently a bad thing. But you have all kinds of powers, unrealized potentials that can create amazing abundance and wealth and joy in your life and the lives of many other people. Much as you gave a shout out to Steve Jobs. Right, he unleashed some amazing value in the world through his creations, and he was hoping to bring into existence things that he knew he valued, and clearly lots of other people place value on, and how much it's augmented their lives. So, in that way, I think that part of the wisdom to know the difference is also realizing the ways in which you are powerful and possibly empowering, and also disempowering, which is why I'm very sensitive in bringing these issues to the setting of a classroom. Because just as by the way you are in a room with other people, and it doesn't have to be a classroom, it could be a conversation like this. You know, what way of being with you would be more empowering, and trying to be mindful of not disempowering you. So the way in which I speak, asking you questions and trying really hard not to make assumptions, right? These are ways I think are be more likely to foster connection and empowerment, rather than having people feel alienated and disconnected or shut down. So and trying to figure out, well, what ways of being would bring that out rather than inhibit it. And that's so in that, this may be a very long answer to your Stoicism question, and I'm trying to unpack why I don't fully take the Stoic approach, even though that saying does overlap with Stoicism.
No, it's a great answer, and I appreciate the point on power. That I do think that word is thrown around with a negative connotation all too often, and everyone likes it when their phone has plenty of power. Everyone likes it when the power works in your house. Everyone likes purchasing power. There's power is a good thing. Physical power, that's part of it's the miracle of technology, really, right? Is we're mobilizing more energy per unit time, and so we can free ourselves from the drudgeries of life and focus on higher value activities. So that's all good, but there is that, I guess, element if the physical power is, again, as you said earlier, pointed towards something that's not life affirming or life destroying, then that's when power can be bad. And it seems like that often manifests itself as political power, and obviously kinetic power and war machines and things like this. Anyway, it's again one of those words. What it's, again, Socrates, the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. It's one of those terms that's just always thrown around like it's evil, and it's just not. It's like, well, what, people send a tweet, oh, power is evil, or whatever it may be. It's like, well, you just sent that through a phone that uses electricity. Like,
And so they must have a very specific subset of concrete instances that they have in mind of power, like Machiavellian,
yes,
nefarious control over others. And that is one way people could choose to use or abuse power.
yeah,
But that's not the definition of power. That's an example of power gone awry.
yes, exactly. Yeah, if anything, it just needs to be conditionalized or qualified in some way. If you want to say like certain form of political power or Machiavellian power techniques or power moves are evil or bad, okay, that's fine. But just be more specific, I guess, would be my gripe about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for a legal and political system to have enough power to protect individual property rights is a good thing.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Wow. Well, we've talked a lot and we haven't even gotten into your paper yet. So to segue into your paper, which again is titled Socratic Teaching Beyond the Paper Chase. Can I just ask you maybe just broad strokes, what this paper is about? And then again, the title is what caught my eye initially, because I'm always looking for sort of money adjacent topics to talk about. So if you could tell us where the title comes from as well, that would be great.
Sure. The Paper Chase is the name of a film about it's partly about a law professor who peppers students in law classes with questions in a kind of gotcha way. And it's a method of teaching that a lot of people fear and a lot of people drop out of law school. It's partly about that. It's also a love story. I don't want to spoil it for people. But when people had heard the phrase Socratic teaching or Socratic pedagogy, like the way in which you develop your teaching principles, they would say, oh, you're just going to ask me lots of questions and I have to answer on the spot. And you're basically trying to trap me. It's like, oh, dear goodness, that's not what I mean by it at all. And so people say, well, what do you mean by Socratic teaching? I said, well, the example of Socrates is he really wanted to know what was true and what's good. Because you're going to choose every day of your life based on what you think is true, hopefully. What beliefs do you have? Do you have good evidence for what you believe or what you think you know? So he was motivated by wanting to understand whether his beliefs had justification. Like, is there good evidence for thinking that what he thinks is true is actually true? And then, well, why would that matter? Well, because if you're acting based on what's true, you should be able to then achieve a good life and to live well. And after all, what is life about other than that is to achieve the human good. So truth and goodness are very much connected. And he knew his own limitations, that he didn't fully understand everything. But he also thought that there were a lot of people living around him who thought they knew more than perhaps they actually did. And if they actually did know a lot, he wanted to learn from them. So he made it his mission in life to go around and ask people questions. Well, you said you're an expert in piety, or you said you're an expert in justice. Well, what do you mean by that? And he would just question them and try to think through, well, if that's what it is, then let's look at the cause and effect, the implications or the logic of what you're saying. But it seems like you end up in this paradox. So what do you really believe? Do you think that we're stuck and have to start over? So he was really concerned in helping himself and others figure out what was true and what is good. And he called himself the gadfly of Athens. Said Athens was like a sleepy horse, and he was a gadfly coming along to nip people, to provoke them into thinking about their lives. And if he could learn from them through conversation with them, he would feel like his life was greatly improved, and he wanted to help his fellow citizens live true and good lives too.
Hmm.
So when I would explain to people, questioning people and like exploring these open-ended questions together and really listening to one another is a great way to, in part, figure out how best to live. And so to me, philosophy is one of the most practical things you could do, because what matters more in your life than knowing that what you think is grounded in reality and is true and helps you live a good life. Otherwise, what is this all about? Right? Meaning and purpose will emerge from that, and the pursuit of a life well lived. And it's only through asking and answering these questions and the lifelong pursuit of constantly increasing your understanding of that and gaining that wisdom we were talking about earlier, about how to systematically integrate your increasing knowledge throughout your life in a principled way to keep improving living for yourself and with the people who you care about in the world, and elevating humanity through this endeavor. So when I put it that way, people are like, oh, wow, that was not at all what I thought Socratic teaching was about. And it wasn't until I was engaged in teaching this way, because I didn't use the lecture method, and I certainly didn't throw out questions to get students to a catch-22. I saw it as a joint endeavor for all of us to learn constantly and increase our context of knowledge and wisdom over time. But it wasn't until, but part of my understanding of how to do this thing called teaching, being a philosophy professor or professor of any topic, really, to me, this type of teaching cuts across any discipline, whether it's science, literature, philosophy, business, I thought it was value neutral, apart from, to me, the most important value, and I was very clear from this up front, was helping you think for yourself, of achieving intellectual independence. Because I can't tell you knowledge, you have to achieve it through understanding and thinking hard, intellectual labor on, thinking about the world and in conversation with others. So it wasn't until some years into this Socratic teaching endeavor where students would say things to me that I said, oh, wow, so maybe I'm not as value neutral as I thought. And what they ultimately were showing me through feedback at the end of semesters was that how I approached teaching and the way I was a teacher in the classroom or imparting things I was unaware of. And I was like, wow, I'm learning so much from my students. They're raising my level of awareness. Like, I didn't realize I was imparting courage and helping people give voice to themselves in ways they were afraid of before. I didn't realize that they would say, wow, you really are patient. And because I don't experience myself as a very patient person in many ways, I'm very impatient with myself in some ways. But they said, no, you will patiently wait for us to respond to questions, even to an uncomfortable silence. And clearly patience is important to you. And you're very patient with us. And then I felt like responsible to step up to the plate and have something worth saying. So I started reading harder for class and preparing better. Like, you helped me up my game as a student, just because of how you were. I said, oh, all these things, there's so many, like, hundreds of examples I could give you of things students told me. But it inspired me to think about, well, maybe the way I am in the classroom says a lot more than what I realized. And so then I started studying Socrates, not just as a logical method, of a method of questioning, but as an example of a human being in the world. And why was I attracted to studying Socrates?
Right.
And to me, went back to integrity. It was very powerful to me for him to be a person of integrity. Whether I fully agreed with what he valued or not was a separate matter from when the rubber meets the road. Does this guy live his values? Is he serious about them? Does he take ideas seriously? Yes, he does. I love that about Socrates. He takes ideas seriously and is willing to live and die by them. And I said, wow, okay, I'm learning a lot from my students. And that was one of the things I learned was how you are while you're doing what you pursue can be extremely powerful. And I then started wondering, I don't want to misuse this power. So
Right.
part of it was me bringing awareness to myself about how I was in the classroom. And it's not that I never made mistakes or and I learned from those too. And for example, like looking at your wristwatch, then students are like, "Oh, you're not really listening to me. You're looking at the time." And I said, "Oh, no, no. Well, actually, no. Thank you for bringing to my attention. I didn't know I telegraphed that to you. That's how you took that. I didn't intend it that way. I know that there's another class has to come in after us, and I know that I want to be mindful that I have this room for a certain period of time and other people are waiting to use it. So I'm trying to be conscientious about them. I didn't mean to stop listening to you." So then I had to realize like the effects that my actions have and how people could take them. And that led to writing this paper.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's
Sorry, I said a lot.
over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Anthony DiClementi last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Thanks to my friends at Swan Bitcoin for supporting the show. Swan sponsored the Sailor series, and I appreciate their support from the very beginning of the What is Money show, and I'm happy to welcome them back. Swan has grown a lot since then. They've built a full-service, Bitcoin-centric financial services company with several different offerings. With the Swan app, you can set up instant and recurring Bitcoin buys, and with this, you can get started at swan.com/breedlove. Swan also enables clients in the US to hold Bitcoin directly in an IRA account, so you can hold Bitcoin in a tax-advantaged way. Get started at swan.com/IRA. If you're looking to buy more than $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, check out Swan Private. You'll get concierge support for buy execution, retirement accounts, inheritance and estate planning, and access to exclusive events, research, and other content. Get started at swan.com/private. Swan Institutional provides financial services to institutions, including Bitcoin-backed lending, asset management, principal investments, Bitcoin services for financial advisors, and Bitcoin mining operations. For those new to Bitcoin, I recommend checking out Swan's Welcome to Bitcoin course at swan.com/welcome. So go to swan.com/breedlove today to get started on your Bitcoin buying journey. No, it's so good because it's in a way, Wow. So I spent, this is going to sound so out of left field, but I'll try to connect it to what you just said. I spent this past weekend, well, it was just Friday, it was Thursday, Friday. I was at a farm in southern Georgia. And one of the things, a lot of people live there in kind of like a co-op environment. One of the things, the activities they engage in there is bear hunting. Now, it's not actually really that bad. There's only like 10 days out of the year that they actually hunt the bear in terms of kill them. And then it's the other 350 plus days a year that it's just training, basically. So the dogs will like chase a bear up a tree, and then they let the bear go. And what I didn't anticipate learning about this was this actually has kind of a win-win dynamic, because the hunter and the dogs get to train, right? They get to be experienced and proficient in the hunt, so that they're not wasteful or destructive or, doing anything wrong. They get to train, for long parts of the year. But the activity is also training the bear to be avoidant of humans, because the bear, as it's being hunted, learns that, well, maybe I'll stay away from those people because they tend to bring dogs and chase me up a tree. So what it does is it kind of creates, the people are developing a skill that's useful. People hunt the bear, they eat the bear, they do all kinds of things. But then also the bear is being trained to stay away from people. And so this kind of a win-win. And so just, I don't know if I'm tying this in correctly, but what you're describing, you are teaching your students about this embodiment of virtue in a way. And then they start to, I guess, share with you their perspective on you actually embodying virtue, which
Or
then,
not.
or showing you your blind spots or complimenting you where you're strong, whatever it may be. And that induces you to step up your game even further. So there's this like mutually constructive training going on. And it reminded me of that dynamic. I don't know if that's a stretch or what, but that was interesting. Just kind of a win-win dynamic. And if I
That's
might,
a fascinating analogy. Thank you.
yeah, thanks. I've been thinking about it for days, so it's just weird to hear. Yeah, it was strange. If I may, I'll read an excerpt here from your paper, actually. And you said this was written 16 years ago, so it's been a while, but these are timeless principles. So you wrote, I was to realize over time, with the help of some of my students, that I did not fully understand what it meant to teach Socratically. Even though I was deliberately teaching Socratically, I was unaware of all that I was doing. One student told me at the end of a course that she had considered dropping the course at one point because of how difficult it was, but she decided to remain because she said that I seemed to love philosophy so much that there must be something to it. Another student told me that she was stunned at how much feedback I provide on essays, and stated that though she was put off at first by the amount of feedback, she felt like I really listened, and thus respected her by carefully reading every word that she wrote. Yet another student accused me of being a quote unquote liberal because he said that I tolerated discussion of diverse and extreme ideas, though I never once indicated any of my public policy views and had even refused to do so when asked by students. One of the most striking comments I received was from a student who said that he wanted to be a teacher like me because I was courageous, humble, and honest. A claim based simply on the fact that I was willing to admit when I didn't know something or needed to think further about some claim. These students, among others, allowed me to realize how powerful a teacher can be as an exemplar, since it was not anything that I deliberately said or anything that we read that could account for some of what those students took away from our classes. And so the primacy here, really, of action or demonstration over explication, like they're both important, but propositional knowing can only get you so far, right? What are the four? I think Vervaeke lays out the 4 levels of knowing: the propositional, procedural, perspectival, and participatory. I think those are right, but propositional is just one, right? It's just the raw data, if you will, there's all of this other data that you're getting in the teaching process, or that you're giving or getting in the teaching process. And it reminds me too, I don't know if there are parallels here, but you often hear that 90% of communication is nonverbal. There's all these little micro expressions and subtle body language cues, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just tremendous. So I don't know, like, how, armed with that knowledge, it would seem as though you would want to start to be more conscious about the other levels you're communicating with your students on, right? Your, again, body language, not looking at your watch, as you said, these little subtle things. But isn't there a danger there where it's like, if you don't want to become self-conscious, like overly self-conscious, where you're robotically like, don't move, don't blink, whatever, like it needs to be natural. So like, how do you find the middle path and becoming more self-aware of these levels of expression that you might not be consciously aware of without becoming overtly self-conscious?
Okay, wow, that's an excellent question. I suppose if there are things that you are doing that were right, and kind of like, if it's not broke, don't fix it, that people bring awareness to, and they're like, oh, I really appreciated this dimension of how you were, even though I didn't realize I was telegraphing that or being like that, because I was absorbed in what we were doing, not me doing the thing. And I think that when you're pursuing what you love, it's very natural and organic to manifest yourself in those non-propositional ways, in a natural way. It's when somebody stops you, they're like, could you not look at your watch, because now I feel like you're ignoring me, or whatever it is. And you're like, oh wow, I didn't realize that action. And then outside of that context in which was brought to awareness, maybe talking through with a friend, or if you go to a counselor, or a colleague who you trust to talk through things with, when you're outside of the context in which you want to be more careful about how to deploy it, you could practice, like, why was I looking at my watch? And maybe like bringing up the conversation in the class and say, oh, when I do this, I want you to let you know it's because of this other reason, not for a bad reason, but for a good reason. And maybe if you find it distracting for me to look at the watch, maybe should I set a timer? Like, maybe talk through, like, what would help fix some of those things to repair that situation. But I think you would have to work on practicing outside of the context in conjunction with, like, addressing and repairing in real time those things that are not working for people, legitimately not working, right? So there's some things people might bring up that are not really problems, and then talk through that, or maybe talk about that outside the context, like come to office hours, or we can, schedule an appointment to converse about this issue or whatnot. So some of those, they would have to need to be worked on outside of the context. And if you think that there's some legitimacy to them in terms of, oh, that's not a best way to be or best way to handle this, or it's a vice, you can figure out what's driving it and reorient your conduct. And over time, you can correct and reform that for yourself. So yeah, it's the more self-conscious you do that, you're going to lose sight of other things and undermine your purpose for being there. So you don't want to damage the situation in trying to perfect it, right? That's where when you make perfection an enemy of the good.
Right. Yes.
So your question's a really good one, and it's a difficult thing to address. You have to figure out contextually how to improve without ruining the context in which it can be in service.
And a lot of it is probably, well, in addition to striving for the virtues, right? Like being honest and someone addresses a blind spot of yours, like being humble enough to hear them out and accept that, oh, maybe they're, telling me something about myself I otherwise couldn't see. There's also just this, well, maybe this is a virtue too, just like work ethic, right? Where you just do the reps and you just practice and you'll just sort of get unconsciously better at these things, right? It's like I always like the example of learning to play the piano, where when you first learn, you're so consciously focused on every tiny movement of your fingers, right? It's very slow and cumbersome. And then you get a little bit faster, a little bit smoother, a little bit faster, a little bit smoother. And then eventually you're a pianist that's just gliding through the keys. So you can sort of start with a lot of consciousness, maybe focused on your methods of communicating different levels and all of that. And then over time, it becomes more subconscious or even unconscious, perhaps.
Yeah, as you use the word embodiment earlier, right? As you
Mhm.
embody and get the kinesthetic sensation of the experience of having reformed yourself in this
Yeah.
way. And it is really like the apprentice sort of relationship. You're apprenticing yourself to self-improvement. And
Yeah.
and then your mastery going from beginner to journeyman, et cetera, up the rung of mastery over time will improve and get integrated with all of your other ways of being,
Yeah. Well, that's
all
well
the other
said.
virtues. There was one dimension of what you said about, I wasn't familiar with this four-part distinction about
Mhm.
propositional.
Yeah. I think it's propositional, perspectival, procedural, and participatory. And I might be messing some of this up, but obviously propositional is knowing what, right? Uh, pro- Procedural is knowing how to do something, like an
Mhm.
actual technique, I think. Um, Participatory is knowing through, so like seeing yourself through the eyes of someone else, sort of that intersubjective kind of, do they know that I know that, like kind of game theory domain. And again, some of this I could be wrong. Um, Hope I'm doing this roughly correct. And then the last one was, no, I've forgotten. Perspectival. Oh, perspectival might be the last one that I said, actually. So I'm not
Maybe
doing this justice. These are the four, if you want to look this up, these are the 4 P's
Mhm.
of knowing that I heard secondhand from John Vervaeke.
Okay, well, I'm interested in looking that up after our
Yeah.
conversation. But when you were talking through those, it sounded roughly similar to something Aristotle discusses in his rhetoric,
Mm.
which are with respect to when you're talking with someone else, uh, and you're so focused in what you're saying and trying to demonstrate the logic, uh, that you don't realize there's a lot more to your communication than what just the words that you're saying. So when you said it's
Hmm.
more than propositional, 90% is maybe nonverbal or non-propositional. It's like, oh, right away I thought, oh, that's very similar to Aristotle talks about what really moves people is not just logos. Logos
Hmm.
is the argument or reasons,
Right.
but there's also ethos, which is character, and
Yeah.
pathos, which is emotion.
Hmm.
And he wanted to be very careful to distinguish doing philosophy and engaging in philosophical conversation using the tools of rhetoric in a non-manipulative way,
Hmm.
but also being conscious that sometimes just giving people the propositional knowledge is not
Hmm.
enough. Like
Yes.
they need when they see the embodiment of it in you. Oh, okay, you told me you defined integrity, but I actually see you doing what you said you would do. Or
Yes.
Socrates was willing to live in a way that he died for his ideas. And that's what integrity means when you live
Yes.
it. Like, so that the ethos of the person, the character of the person, can be much more powerful for people than the words that you tell them and the way that you make them feel.
Mm.
So, when the part of my article that you quoted, one of the students who said that who was first to put off by how much feedback I give with my red pen on student papers.
Hmm.
Uh, at first, she was put off because I don't think anybody had ever paid that much attention to what she said or wrote before.
Mm.
And she was rather overwhelmed, but over time, to be made to feel psychologically visible to another person. Like she said, you really listened to me. Like I almost got the sense that this is the first time she felt like she had been really heard or seen by somebody for her ideas.
Right.
Like she was taken very seriously. I said, I hang on your every word in rough drafts or papers you submit because I take you and your mind seriously.
Mm.
Your ideas matter, and they're going to matter to how you live your life. So why wouldn't I pay attention to every word and give you feedback on what you're writing and saying? That to me is my responsibility as a teacher.
It sounds loving almost. I mean, she was probably, yeah.
And she may have felt loved
Yeah.
in that for that. And she didn't say it that way, but
Yeah.
now that you brought that up, you experience. So not only was there something I was saying about what I was doing, like this is my responsibility as a teacher, but she also experienced it as like I'm really doing what I said I was going to do on the syllabus. I'm going to give you lots of feedback,
Right.
and really read what you write. But also, I guess emotionally she felt that was she may have experienced an emotional element of it
Yeah.
too. The way in which you just said was coming across to you. Like I do love supporting my students in learning.
Yeah.
And so there are these three dimensions, and I hadn't fully realized when I thought of myself as a Socratic educator in the method I explicitly adopted, that those other dimensions were coming out. I think I focused a lot on the ideas
Yeah.
and not as much on who I was as a person or the emotional dimension of my being,
Yeah.
how that came across to them, and whether they experienced it as positive or negative, and to be made aware of that by their feedback has meant a great deal to me. Even if it sometimes was difficult to hear, I'm like, oh, okay, that's something to work on. Or, wow, I didn't realize I had made such a positive difference. And it was
Yeah.
because of other thing that had nothing to do with, I handed back their assignments in a timely way, right? Or
Yes.
whatever it was, or I, covered the things in the syllabus I would. Well, that doesn't matter as much as these other things, clearly. And
Yeah.
what they were taking from the course was much deeper than their understanding of a particular Platonic dialogue, reading about Socrates and the Crito or the Euthyphro.
Yeah.
We're reading Locke's Second Treatise of Government, but wow, I really came to understand why, producing something of value is deeply important in my life, and that I do deserve to keep the fruits of my labor, and why that matters. And like I was inspired to create something, and I've had students who've invented things or gone on to publish things, and they never imagined they would. I said, why not you? Why other people are the ones who produce and create and do wonderful things in the world? Why not you? You have a wonderful mind, and to support them in unleashing that. So I think it actually helped getting that feedback from them. It was like a virtuous loop,
Yeah.
a virtuous cycle, and helping me become a better teacher.
And what a beautiful gift you can give them. I mean, just as you were saying that, kind of putting myself in that student's shoes, and he or she would have resonated with that if they had never received that level of attention or that kind of attention or attention in that way before, right? So you're like almost taking them seriously and causes them to take themselves more seriously, like, oh, maybe I do have a mind and I have ideas that are worth talking about, and giving them some confidence basically just through that sort of focused, rigorous attention. And I like that, really in the case of you embodying the philosophy, especially if you can do it with a light touch, like, so you have the integrity, right? So you're not just there telling them what the book says, you're also exhibiting the qualities that the book is alluding to, right? Socrates is, I don't know if you'd call him the hero of the story, but he's sort of the main character. He's, for Plato, it's his archetype, right? Really the archetype of the archetypal philosopher, something like that. And so you're sort of proving that maybe you're not Socrates necessarily, but you're definitely acting in accordance with the the lesson in the book. But then if you can also handle it with sort of a light touch, the humor, which you also talk about in the paper, this, I think, it really proves, obviously the integrity is proved by how well you embody the philosophy. Then the light touch and the humor, though, shows a level of proficiency, right? That you're just so good with this stuff that it's, in board meetings I've been in with like big business guys, and I used to be in an executive role, like you could always tell the guys that were really wound up tight and were worried about like trying to control the flow of the meeting and making sure all the points got discussed. And then there's these other guys that are just a little more comfortable in that setting, right? It's a high pressure setting, but they're just, they make jokes and they did this and and it's those guys that they inspire more awe in you, actually. And if you inspire awe in people, that's what induces the imitation. So if you're embodying the philosophy, and then you're also, as you mentioned in the paper, Socrates has kind of a light touch. He uses humor to diffuse tensions and whatnot. That's what really inspires that imitation in others, or imitation by others. And I would think that would be how you really get virtue to percolate. So it was like a long thing, but now I want to ask you one other thing about this. You mentioned Pathos, which is more like the emotional character, the heartstrings, basically. And one thing I've noticed, and we talk about a lot of heady topics on this show. I have a lot of these types of conversations with people in real life, but it's occurred to me that most people don't really care what you think until they think that you care. It's almost like you need to access them in the heart first. Like they need to understand you're a good person. You're not trying to, trick them, or I don't know, defraud them, or, be a snake oil salesman or anything of that sort, that you're actually a genuinely good person that cares for people. Then if you can get to that, if you can establish that pathos or heart connection with them, then they're open to listening to the logos, right? Your propositions.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you just got two people going at it propositionally. It's hard, it's because arguments are weird. They can sort of, this with the internet, right? You can almost justify any diet, any lifestyle, anything if you research it on the internet, right? There's arguments for everything. The earth is flat, the earth is round, eat meat, eat vegetables, like anything. So what's my question here? People seemed to be, so Socrates was good at that, right? Connecting with people in a sort of human way that would at least open them to the logos, his propositional truth, which was really just a lot of questioning, right? He just sort of had this incessant, I don't want to say incessant, he had a very rigorous level of questioning. And the frustration with him seemed to come because people that he was interfacing with, he wouldn't accept their answers with finality, right? There was always another question in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe, and again, I always like that quote of his, the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. It's like he's almost highlighting the limitations of language in a way. And then maybe that's why there's such an emphasis on action, and why, what you do speaks so much louder than what you say.
Mm-hmm.
And what I want to ask about, sorry, this is a very long introduction to this question. The American pragmatist said that truth is found at the end of inquiry. And Socrates is all about inquiry. And there's that old saying, questions, I'd rather have questions that don't have answers than answers that cannot be questioned. So there's this idea that we constantly need to be engaged in ever vigilant inquiry to like pursue truth or get closer to truth, or an approximation of truth. Maybe we can't contain it in words or language or whatever it may be. So with that very long-winded introduction, what is the relationship between the Socratic method, or Socratic pedagogy, I think is the term you use here? How does it relate to truth and the discovery of truth?
Okay. Well, I guess there are, depending on your conception of philosophy or the the worldview that you hold, there would be different answers. And being more of an Aristotelian, I don't quite embrace Plato's and Socrates' direction. So I will
What
just
is that?
articulate
What is
what I
that
think.
direction?
Okay. Well, at a certain extent, I think Socrates and Plato think that language peters out, and there's only some things that you can directly intuit through reason, above and apart from experience, beyond physical experience. And I think I'm a bit closer to Aristotle on developing your ability to think about your experience of the world and things in the world, to constantly refine your concepts and your love, and to capture and be as precise as possible about the world and the claims you're making about things in the world that you're observing. So, because Aristotle's much closer to the empirical tradition, and Plato and Socrates are much more transcendental, right? Aristotle's a naturalist versus being a supernaturalist. So uh, I think that using your ability to reason about your experience of things in the world, you can constantly refine and expand your knowledge based on your expanding context of experience with the world. And that the more carefully you do that, the more precise and truth tracking the language and you're using to represent the concepts you have in mind will be. Uh, and I think for Plato and Socrates, language gives out at a certain point, and there are things that can't be truths that can't be communicated through language. And sometimes your thinking outstrips your ability to articulate what you're thinking about, which is why I think it's really important to write and to think through writing as much as possible, so that you can take it out of your head and put it on paper and see if it holds up against the scrutiny of the real world. Like a lot of things sound good in your head, and you take it out and put it down on black and white on paper in front of you, like, oh, is that what that idea was? I shook it out of my head and put it down, and when I clarify it and talk about it with people and compare it to experience of the world, maybe it's still unclear and have to work on it, or maybe it's false. Like, oh wow, I was going off and up in the clouds in my mind, and I took it out of my head. I see that it actually isn't going anywhere, and that doesn't capture anything true. And certainly I've had lots of dead ends that I just threw in the trash basket that way, and only because I took it out of my head and put it on paper. So, and I think that so I think that's where I part company with where what at least Socrates, and to some extent, Plato, and there, of course, Socrates never wrote anything. Anything we know about him is captured through the writing by other people. So we're relying, especially in Plato's early dialogues, that captures more of who Socrates was rather than less over time. So I think, with respect to the role that this questioning plays in getting at the truth, I think it's absolutely crucial to you're experiencing the world, you're looking out at the world and noticing things and trying to articulate, having ideas about them, then articulating it through language and engaging in this endeavor with other people. But first, you're representing the world to yourself. So you're trying to navigate this world for your own context and for your purposes of living. And then you use that language about your thinking to communicate with other people and bounce ideas off of them, kind of like what we're doing now. And a lot of times, you mentioned the word blind spots before. Other people can help you see blind spots in your own thinking about the world, or you have a limited context of experience, and other people have a different context, and they can, oh, well, in my experience, this is what I've seen or heard, and or what I've thought about in relation to it. And so let's, talk through that together. So I think that the shared conversation, that philosophy or philosophical approaches toward understanding anything are important toward getting at the truth about the world and ourselves.
Mm.
And that there's genuine knowledge that can be had, right? What is truth, but a relationship between the claims you make about the world and the world itself.
Mm. Mm.
So something that I say could be true or false based on how the world is. If I
Mhm.
say Robert is standing up, well, what would make that true or false?
Mm.
The fact of whether or not you are indeed standing up or not standing up. Are you
Mhm.
sitting down?
Mhm.
Are you doing a handstand? Right. So
Mhm.
I would need to verify or disconfirm my claim to know whether it's true or false in relation to the way the world is.
Mm.
And a lot of claims that we make are not as easy to confirm or disconfirm as directly as that. So when
Right.
the more abstract that our claims are about the nature of justice or love or virtue, the more difficult, the farther away it is from immediate experience, the more difficult it is to talk through and figure out through these long chains of reasonings from the world to our claims about it. It is, which is why I think these sorts of conversations are incredibly valuable, because
Mm.
knowing whether certain major claims we make about what's good or not, or what's true or false,
Mm.
and how we live in light of that, those understandings makes all the difference in the world to whether our lives go well or poorly. So to me, these conversations are in the service of our lives going better rather than
Mm.
worse. And there's real knowledge to be achieved there. It's hard, sweaty intellectual labor, but
Mm.
I think it's important to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Are you sick of being robbed by politicians through inflation and endless money printing? If so, you need to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 25th through 27th. As the largest Bitcoin and Fintech conference in the world, Bitcoin 2024 stands as a beacon of monetary freedom, a glimmer of hope amongst a darkening macroeconomic backdrop. Top speakers, companies, and thought leaders from across the industry will convene in Nashville to look ahead to the next year and beyond. I will be there, and Bitcoin conferences like this have become my favorite place to socialize since becoming a Bitcoiner. Ticket prices will increase soon. Get your tickets now and secure your spot at this game-changing event. So go to b.tc/conference and use discount code Breedlove to sign up for the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Again, that's b.tc/conference, discount code Breedlove.
Dialogos, right? Combining. I mean, even if you just purely looked at it as a computational load, right? For people to connect and distribute that computational load among many minds. I mean, that's how we solve our biggest problems, and that's the miracle of capitalism and all of these things, And
I love that. Capitalism as a dialogue for problem solving.
yeah, yeah, yeah. This is why also not that we need to get into it, but money I think is such a fascinating topic because it is that relational tool like language through which we interconnect our propositional truth space or the logos that each one of us is imbued with. And yeah, fascinating stuff. I want to ask, you said something there that struck me, writing as thinking,
Thinking through writing.
thinking through
It's
writing.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that the way in which you get to know the contents of your own mind is to write.
This is, I mean, you're actually reflecting on the contents of your own mind, right? You project them onto an external medium or substrate, and then you reflect upon them. Others reflect upon them. You mentioned earlier too that you've done a lot of writing, obviously, and now you do some editing as well. And you were telling me offline you like to help writers get unstuck, I believe is the way you put it. I always like to ask writers that I have on the show for their tips, their techniques, their strategies, their routines, How, as an aspiring writer or someone who's aspiring to be better and more consistent, more proficient, maybe you could just give me kind of an overview of the broad strokes of how you help people become better writers.
Okay. When people are, I call them when they're sticky, they're stuck in something and they can't start. They're looking at a blank page. I said, well, why do you care about writing to begin with? What is the thing in the world that's drawn your attention to it that you want to write about? Right? Because writing is writing about something. And usually because you have a burning question that you want to have answered about that thing in the world. And either you don't yet know the answer to it, and so you want to figure it out and write to kind of and research and write to figure it out, or you think you have the answer to it and you want to tell the world and share it with people. So it all starts with the deepest thing is what's moving you to want to write. If it's and when people frankly answer that question, so long as sometimes it's, oh, well, I just thought that writing is a glamorous life and I want to be known as a writer. And I'll say, well, whether it's glamorous or not, I don't know. Whatever connotations you have with writing. When people write, they write about something because they care about it and they have something to say about it. So what is the thing that grabbed you? Right, just put it down on the piece of paper. I don't care if it's 2 words, a sentence, a paragraph, just write down what you're just absolutely have a burning desire to focus on right now. What matters to you that you want to write about. Put it down on a piece of paper. So that's the first thing, get that out of their head. The second thing, if you were to formulate your endeavor in the form of a question, a burning question about that topic that you want to answer, and maybe you already think you've answered it, how would you write that question? Write your question down. Or maybe you have multiple questions about the thing that you're interested in. And we'll write all those questions down. And maybe one comes to the surface that's your big motivating question. Okay, so we got what is the thing you care about? Which be as specific and clear as possible about a pointed, open-ended question that's not easy to answer. Then, what do you think so once I got past those 2 levels, what's your answer to the question? If you were to, what's the most concise way of stating in a sentence or 2 or a paragraph, your answer to it? And if you're stumbling, that's okay. If it sounds vague, that's okay. Just write it down. The important thing to do is to get this out of your head in stages. What do you care about? What are your questions about it? What do you have to say in answer to the questions? And as that takes shape, and then you realize, oh, I don't just have one answer to the question. Sometimes people think they have an article, and in fact, they have a book project in mind. And suddenly, they have actually 4 or 5 big questions. And guess what? Those are probably chapters. And your answers to each question are going to have maybe 3 or 4 different reasons to them, which are then sections to chapters. And then you said, well, why do you think any of those claims are true? And suddenly you've got an outline for a book. Right? So, or it could just, or it may not be that big. It could actually just be an article. Maybe it's a blog post. Maybe it's one big point with 3 examples to illustrate your point. But it could be an article. It could be a book. I don't know yet. And it doesn't matter because when you have something burning that you want to write about, and you're really someone who cares about this and it's not a pose, it doesn't matter whether it's a blog post, an article, or a book. When you've produced it and gotten it out of your head and said what you wanted, you will feel very proud of what you've created. And you will see it's a process that once people get it out of their head, it starts giving them the confidence, like, oh, I actually do have something to say. And now I have an organization. Like when you can start, just put your ideas down, then you can start organizing them. And figure out in what order should they be. Is something missing? What needs to be developed? Maybe this thing doesn't fit with everything else, and you pull it out, and maybe that's a different writing project for another day. Right. So, but you need, in order to be at that point of organizing or reorganizing or drafting, then revising and editing, right? So it can be a long process, but it starts with getting it out of your head and on the paper. And so this is a very long answer to your question about tips and techniques, but this is the most concise way I can think of putting how to get, whether somebody's a student or a seasoned writer tackling a new writing project that they're stuck on. It all starts with, why do you care about this?
It's beautiful that sort of ties to what I said earlier too, right? Like, people need to know that you care before they care what you know, kind of thing.
And you need to know why you care about it.
Yeah. And it
It's
speaks to
moving you.
the earliest point where you talked about the motivation actually giving quality to the action in a way. So the why do you care? Yeah, it's very interesting. Sorry, one
Why do you
last, I know.
care? What's your question? What do you have to say about it?
Yeah. So what do you care about? What are your questions about what you care about? What are your answers to those questions? And then that
Yes.
becomes a framework for a piece of writing.
Yes. For focusing your mind on
Yes.
something specific and achievable in writing, even if it's on the back of an envelope, you've
Right.
got the start of a writing project out of your head and on paper. And often that's the biggest hurdle I think people face.
Yes. So for people that have created that framework for themselves, do you then suggest people write an hour per day, a page per day? Is there any type of rigor or discipline that you say to stick to, or is this more of a customized thing for each person? How do you deal with that?
It can be somewhat customized. Like, sometimes people write best after they go for a walk. Sometimes people write best in the morning. Sometimes people need those deep work blocks, right? Like Cal Newport deep work, and they need 3 to 4 hours. Other people can produce something, give themselves a timer, 15 minutes. What can I get on paper? And they'll work in those spurts. So there's variability. With the important thing about it is to know yourself and be consistent. And even if you don't end up producing as much as you want in the time frame you gave, you will have done something. So I would strongly encourage people to lean into what they know is the most productive period of the day for them, and to give themselves 5 or 6 days a week in which they do that. You have to, I think, making it a matter of routine, but also ritual. Sometimes people, they like to use certain, like I start out writing projects always by hand on blank pieces of paper that I can kind of storyboard and move around. That's how I work best. And it slows up my thinking process, so I handwrite before long before I get to a computer. Other people do better with the computer or a typewriter. It varies. So whatever, and some people like to write with color pens or whatever, or they need a cup of tea, or they get themselves into a groove through this is my transition into my writing period. And so kind of crossing that threshold into your writing period, no matter what part of the day, and in your allocated time, and stick to it. Trust the process and lean into your process that optimizes your productivity in writing. And what that looks like can vary from person to person, but what I've never seen vary is being consistent, and of making it a matter of shifting yourself from everything else you do into writing mode. Don't wait for a flash of inspiration, because you'll never write anything that way.
That is great. I really like the framework, and I'm going to use that. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. I hope see what's effective for you.
Yes, I hope it is as well. Okay, I've kept you way too long. So what I will do now I'll read a closing excerpt from your paper, and then I'll throw it over to you for a final word. But just to, I guess, revisit that point between accessing someone's heart before they're going to let you access their mind. You conclude the paper by writing, how Socrates has clearly inspired us as much as anything he said. So instructors should be as mindful of how they are in the classroom as much as about what they say while there. Students, just as much as instructors, would certainly second Laches's response to a person like Socrates, who wrote, "Whenever I hear a man discussing virtue or some kind of wisdom, I am completely delighted to see the appropriateness and harmony existing between the speaker and his words. The discourse of a man gladdens my heart and makes everyone think that I am a discussion lover because of the enthusiastic way in which I welcome what is said." And then you wrote to conclude, "We owe it to ourselves and our students to, quote unquote, gladden their hearts. Nothing less than our personal and professional integrity and their minds, characters, and lives depends on it." Just great. I mean, like, I'm not even a teacher, but this is a good approach for life, I think. Like, really, well, I guess this reminds me of something Jordan Peterson said, where he says he really strives. What does he say? One of the chapters of his book is like, always tell the truth, or at least don't lie. So he tries to just say what is true for him in a moment, right? He's trying to actually, it's not even him, it's below him, whatever's welling up inside of him. You don't really control your thoughts and ideas entirely, right? It comes from within you. And so this idea of just being accordant with that, right? Like what you are actually thinking and your actual intention, right? Rather than trying to, I don't know, put a veneer or a gloss on it, right? And trying to create some impression, like actually being, I don't know, I'm losing words here, authentic to yourself or your motivation, perhaps. So yeah, I would love to hear your closing words for our audience on this long and beautiful discussion.
That closing paragraph that you read and how you were connecting it to what you were bringing up with Jordan Peterson about living honestly,
Mm-hmm.
and living honestly in a way that you strive to bring your best self to the task of daily living, and to be thoughtful and intentional about what you're doing so that you don't crash into the lives of other people. And I think if more people, like, there's a domain of the classroom, but it's just really, in some sense, a metaphor for life. Like, bring yourself to see every moment of your life possible, and certainly all the occasions in which you're trying to create and produce and interact with other people. Think of them all as occasions to be intentional and to be aware. You will never get these moments back. Well, and to know that what you say and do here and now matters for you and it matters for others. And I think that being mindful that you could gladden their hearts or you could darken their hearts, not just for students, but for anybody in your life. Do you want to crash into people? Do you want to crash and burn for yourself? Or do you want to really live? Do you want to be alive every moment of your life and doing it in an as empowered and aware of way as possible? And I'm hoping that people will choose to say yes. Yes to that, yes to living, and all the work that involves. Because it is work, but there's a deeply vibrant joy that comes from the achievement of that work. And you may not feel it every day, and so sometimes, honestly, you're just really exhausted, or maybe you're ill, or something terrible has happened, and you will do the best that you can that day, and people will appreciate your honesty in being where you're at. And that is the best you could do that day. You can't ask for more than that. And I do think that that sort of honesty and authenticity, no matter where you're at in your energy level or awareness level, that goes a long way until you can be restored to your optimal conditions and seek to keep becoming your best self.
It's excellent. I'm just admiring you. I think you're a great teacher, obviously. So yeah, thank you. Today, it's funny. I don't know why that's how life works, but today was an especially like frustrating day with little things around the house. Things didn't go right all day, and then finally got to this conversation, feeling a little frustrated and out of sorts. And this is just the best conversation I think anyone could have asked for at the end of a day like today. And what you said there at the end, just approaching the task of daily living, that is such a chore. It sounds so minor and simple, but the day in, the day out, approaching that with your best self, knowing that what you do matters for you and matters for others. That is a very important perspective to maintain. And yeah, I thank you. Thank you for this brilliant discussion.
Thank you for inviting me to join you in this conversation. This has been lovely.
I couldn't agree more. Carrie, where can people find you on the internet?
You can locate my CV and some of my published work on academia.edu. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn. I do not yet have my own website. One of these days I shall. But that's where you can find me online.
Beautiful. We will link to all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much again for doing this.
Thanks. Bye-bye.